Tonight's class is dedicated in memory of Nathan and Millie Marcus, Alehem HaShalom, by Renata and Robert Marcus, and in honor of Rabbi Shlomo Fari. Keep making our community great. Thank you so much. I will do my best. Le'ilui Nishmat Rachel Bat Sophie Shefia, Aleh HaShalom, and Rabbi David Ben Rivka, Alav HaShalom, Shlomo Ben Rivka, Alav HaShalom, Rachel Bat Yafa, Alav HaShalom, Yvette Bat Bahiyeh, Yaakov Ben Sarah, Leah Bat Mazal, Alehem HaShalom, and for the Refuah Shlema of Rose Razel Chaya Bat Chava, Marco Mordechai Ben Jamile, Racheli Chaya Bat Yehudit, and Rev Yoshua Yosef Pinto Ben Zeri, by Anonymous. Hazaku Baruch to all those that are achieving these wonderful zichuyot with regards to sponsoring the classes. You know, we could not be doing it without you, so it's a tremendous boon to all of us to be able to kind of do this and work on this incredible project together. Okay, let's begin. Vayir'u kol ha'eda ki gava Aharon. In the end of Parashat Chukat, it teaches us about the sad and untimely death of Aharon. Vayibku et Aharon shiloshim yom, and they cried for Aharon for 30 days, Kol Bet Yisrael, all of the Jewish people. Now, if you look at Rashi points out on the word Kol Bet Yisrael, all of the Jewish people cried for Aharon. Rashi says he's pointing out something that is actually quite controversial. If you take a look when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, you'll notice a similar verse. And what does the verse say over there? The verse says that the opportunity to sanctify, to mourn for Moshe was unlike the opportunity that was there when it came to Aharon. When it came to Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Vayivku oto Bet Yisrael. The Jewish people cried for him. When it came to Aharon, it says, and all the Jewish people, Kol Bet Yisrael. Rashi says, what's the difference between Aharon and Moshe? How come one of them it says Kol Bnei Bet Yisrael, and one of them it just says Bet Yisrael? And Rashi says, what happened when Aaron died? Ha'anashim ve'anashim. All the people, the men, the women, Lefi Shehaya Aharon Rodef Shalom, because Aharon was someone who chased peace, umatil ahava ben ba'aleh miriva, and he would place and plant love between those that were fighting with one another, uben ish liishto, and between a man and his wife. So therefore, since Aaron was the peacemaker, he was the peace chaser, therefore when he passed away, there was an added element of sadness, an added element of crying, because they had lost that great light. The light that allowed them to see through the darkness of the fights that they were having, through the darkness of the difficulty that they were experiencing, and instead of having all of the acrimonious fighting between them, instead what wound up happening was that husband and wife got back together. Friends were able to patch things up and move on, all in his merit. And that caused an excess of mourning. And I always think about that. I know I'm a weird person for thinking about it, but from a Jewish perspective, thinking about death doesn't make you morbid. Thinking about death makes you cautious. It makes you think, how would I like to be remembered? Ultimately, when all is said and done, will I have lived a life that was meaningful enough that actually, you know what, people cared that I'm no longer here? Now that's a very powerful thing to think about. And in fact, the Mishnah in Avot tells us that a person who thinks about the day of their death is a person that ultimately will ensure that he gets his actions right. Why? Because he's thinking to himself, is this worth the pain and the suffering that I'm going to put myself through? So when a person thinks about their mortality, about the fact that there will be a day, that one day, hopefully in a very long time, where there'll be a day where I will no longer be, among the living, at that thought, they think to themselves before they make any decisions, is this thing that I'm going to do, is it worth the price? Will it matter in the end of time? Okay? Now, I think about, this idea, what they're going to say about me in my funeral. I think about it maybe too much even. But the bottom line is, it's a very powerful tool, as the Mishnah and Avot teaches us. Okay. So now that we've explained that, I want to kind of look together at this magnificent idea. The Mishnah says as follows. What is this character trait of Aharon that made him so beloved? So Rashi said a very interesting words, the words that we named the whole class after. This idea of Rodef Shalom, the chasing after peace. So I want to look at that idea together with you, hopefully tonight, and ask ourselves, how can we be people like Aharon who are also chasers of peace, who are causing with our lives shalom and not divorce and not fighting and not all these kind of things. So let's look at the words of the Mishnah from which Rashi drew this line, Rodef Shalom. It occurs, if a person wants to look it up, you'll find it. This idea, this phrase is first used in the Mishnah in Avot. And in Avot, it tells us as follows. Heve mitalmidav shel Aharon. Hillel taught. Hillel v'Shammai kiblu mehem. They learned from their rabbis. Hillel omer. Heve mitalmidav shel Aharon. Be from the students of Aharon HaKohen. Ohev shalom. He who loves peace. V'rodef shalom. Ohev et habiriyot mekarvan Torah. He loved every single creation, and through that he was able to bring them close to Torah, to make them better. Now, these four things are going to form the outline for our class tonight, and hopefully will be something that each and every one of us could take away at the end of this night and inculcate and bring into our lives to have a much more peaceful existence. I think today we suffer, majority of the people in this world today suffer from an excess of stress. And oftentimes, stress that actually we don't even need in our lives, but we bring into our lives unnecessarily. And that stress happens because there's a person in our lives that fights with us, there's a person in our family that fights with us, and what if we could figure out a way around that? And I want to talk about that using these four terms. So let's look at the Mishnah one more time together. The Mishnah says, love peace, chase peace, love people, and bring them close to Torah. Now, I want to point out one more question before we begin. I said something that was actually incorrect, and I waited to see if anyone would comment on it before I carried on, but nobody did. It could be because you don't want to embarrass me. You thought I might have done it by mistake. I'm judging you favorably now, okay? But whatever the case is, I want to point out this magnificent mistake. Hevemi talmidav shel, be from the students of, I said, Aharon HaKohen. The Mishnah does not use his terminology. We don't call him, be a student of Aharon the Kohen. It says, be a student of Aaron. Doesn't mention that he was a Kohen. Why? Why would we omit his illustrious position? In fact, that's actually how he's known. So how come we don't mention him? I remember the other day we mentioned this documentary that was showing about Michael Jordan called The Last Dance. And there was this hilarious moment when all of a sudden on the screen they kind of have different people pop up and speak about their memories. And all of a sudden it pops up and it says Barack Obama. And what does it say underneath it? You know, what do you say by all these other people? This guy, head coach of the Bulls. This guy, you know, whatever. Here it said Barack Obama, resident of Chicago. Right? I checked to see if The Last Dance was screening on Fox, but it wasn't, right? So that wasn't the reason why they called him resident of Chicago. They completely neglected to mention that he was president of the United States, right? That's a funny omission. So too here, it's a funny omission to say, be like a student of Aharon, and not say who actually Aharon was. He was the Kohen. And the answer is that the Mishnah is trying to teach us a secret lesson. And that is, great people aren't great because of their titles. A rabbi is not great because he's a rabbi. A rebbitzin is not great because she's a rebbitzin. A president is not great because he's a president. And you could have your opinions about each and every president. But the ones that are great, it's not their position that made them, but rather it's what they brought to that job, some element of their internal self that they brought to bear from the position that they were granted, that actually then transformed and uplifted the position that they were working in to be able to illustrate their great deeds. And in fact, what is magnificent is, you know why we don't call him Aharon HaKohen? because we learned this lesson before Aharon was a Kohen. Where? Let's go back in time. Moshe is arguing with God. God says, go to Egypt. Moshe says no. God says, go to Egypt. Moshe says no. God says, go to Egypt. Moshe says no. 7 days they're arguing. Okay? But what is the core reason initially why Moshe says no? Moshe says, Shelach na biyad tishlach. Send it in the arms. You want to send an emissary? Send it in the hands or in the arms of the person that you would normally send it with. Now that's a very strange thing to say. Shlach na biyad tishlach. Send it in the hands of that one you normally send. And our rabbis explain that what Moshe was actually saying was, he was saying, God, there's a prophet already. Who is the prophet Moshe was speaking about? Moshe meant there was a prophet already. Who is that prophet? That prophet is Aaron. Aaron had already been a operating prophet, if you will, in the Jewish people. So Moshe said, I'm the younger brother. How could you make me? How could you give me this job? Don't you realize, so to speak, God? Don't you know that it's going to offend Aharon, the fact that I'm going to take this job when I'm his younger brother? And what is amazing is that actually when we take a look and what winds up happening is that Hashem says, no, you're making a mistake. Aaron is so great that his reaction to the fact that you're the leader is not one of jealousy or anger, but rather his reaction to your position is the exact opposite. V'ra'acha v'samach belibo. He will see you and he will rejoice in his heart. You want to know why we don't call Aaron HaKohen? Because actually, the lesson we learn from the fact that he was a peaceable person and that he loved peace and that he changed peace was not a lesson we learned from Aaron the Kohen. It was a lesson we learned from Aaron the nobody. It was a lesson we learned before he was promoted to Kohen. He was given the job of Kohen because of the lofty way with which he dealt with this devastatingly embarrassing news. He was the firstborn Aaron. He was much older than Moshe. He was already a prophet. In fact, he was here amongst the people working all this time while Moshe ran away. He was in another country. So who would you have expected to get this job? No one but Aaron. And yet, when Moshe comes towards him, God Almighty himself says, I'm looking in his heart and I know his truth. And in his heart, he is not upset. He has joy. So I want to share with you the first lesson, if you will, of loving or chasing peace. Actually has nothing to do with what you're going to say. A lot of people think, they want to ask me my advice as to how to deal with some problem or some issue that arises between family members. Rabbi, what can I say that will reinstate the peace? What can I say? And I'm often tempted to tell them, actually, don't think so much about what you're saying. You know what solved this problem for Aaron? No words. In fact, it was God who told Moshe that Aaron was full of joy. That allowed Moshe to fulfill his role. It was God that told Aharon this, that wound up giving him this unbelievable honor, the honor of being the leader of all of the Kohanim Gedolim eternally, Aharon HaKohen. So the lesson we learned was that Aaron loved peace so much that he did not let it get to his heart. So the first thing I want to talk about tonight is having a Ziploc bag around your heart. That when somebody says something, or when someone doesn't give you the proper kavod, or when someone doesn't, respect your position, or they didn't let you say your piece, put your heart in a Ziploc bag. Don't let it get wet. Aaron hears devastating news. He doesn't let it bother him. There's not a conversation in which he works it out with Moshe. Moshe doesn't need to convince him. God, in fact, doesn't say anything to Aaron either. All God says is, Moshe, I'm telling you, he's okay with it. The first step towards having and chasing peace is actually not letting a fight get started. Now, I cannot stress the importance of this trick, if you will. You want to know how you have shalom? Don't get angry in the first place. Now that sounds obvious and it sounds easy. It is not easy, but I also don't think it's so obvious. I think for most of us, actually, we think that shalom means, or loving shalom means, fixing a machloket. But actually, you are a lover of peace if you avoid machloket entirely. And that's the lesson we learned from Aharon, not HaKohen, but Aharon, the person who he was, even before the machloket. I want to share with you something unbelievable. The Zohar says that Aharon's soul, his essence, his consciousness, was actually a reincarnation of a person we've previously met in the Torah. And it sounds quite funny, this person. Who would you think that Aharon, who is he who's he redoing their life? And the Arizal says that Aharon actually was a reincarnation of Haran. Haran actually is the same letters as the name Aharon, right? So effectively, what we're learning from this is that Aharon was there to fix Haran's mistake. Now, the Arizal is saying something which is very interesting, but kind of takes us down a different thought path. I just want to chuck it your way. That Haran had a mistake to fix with regards to Avodah Zarah. Because you know what? He didn't say immediately that he was on the side of Avraham Avinu when he was offered the chance, one way or the other, to join Avraham or to join Nimrod. Aharon was given the chance to be able to rectify it. But on some level, he also had a part of the sin of Avodah Zarah because he didn't stand up against the Jewish people when they asked him to build them the golden calf. Okay? That's what the Arizal is kind of teaching us. But I thought of something else, which to me was very, very powerful realization. Perhaps the fixing that Aharon needed to do within Haran was, you know what the challenge with Haran was? One simple thing. Haran didn't know what he wanted. They come to Haran and they say, are you with Avraham, who worships God, or are you with us, the people, with Nimrod? We worship the idols. Who are you with? And Haran's response is, give me a minute. Let me see what happens. If Avraham goes through and he comes out unscathed, I'm with him. If he doesn't, if he dies in the furnace of fire you're about to throw him in, then I'll be with you. Avraham walks into the furnace of fire, gets through, miraculously he's saved. Haran says, okay, I'm with Avraham. They throw him in the fire and Haran dies. Now, Haran effectively kind of risked his life for God. So why is he being made out to be this bad person? So we've discussed elements of this previously about the idea of being someone who's so focused that they know what they want and they don't rely on an external medium to teach them what they want. They don't wait for it to be proven to them, for a miracle to happen in order to be able to do it. That's one answer. But I want to share with you a different idea here. Sometimes a person gets angry because they take their eyes off the prize. How many times have I seen people fight over a certain amount of money? They go to court over the amount of money and they wind up spending more money in legal fees than they actually would have inherited or they actually would have been able to settle with regards to the business. Why would someone do that? And the answer is because actually somewhere along the line they forgot what their choice was. Their choice initially was to get the money that they felt was owed them. Eventually, that stopped mattering when the guy upset them enough that the anger takes over the steering wheel. And you know what? I don't mind losing so long as the other person loses as well. Okay? Do you hear that point? So perhaps what Aharon was there to fix in Haran was that Haran was someone who didn't know clearly what he wanted. Aharon had such a clarity in what he wanted that when he found out the devastating news that he was being passed over, he was composed. By the way, we find that exact same equilibrium in Aharon later in his life when his two sons die. And what does the Pasuk say? Vayidom Aharon. In both cases, Aharon maintains his composure. So step number one in chasing peace is in not letting it get away from you in the first place. Understand, what is it that I want here? You have husbands and wives sometimes who fight over their relationship. And I always found this such an interesting thing, because what are they fighting for? This one says you need to do this for me, that one says you need to do that for me. But ultimately, what are they after? They're after a better relationship. Do you think the fighting is going to help the relationship? The problem is that once anger gets in, upset, ego gets in, immediately we lose focus on what the prize is. Aaron understood that perfection in life was what the prize was. And therefore, it might mean that he would be a redeemer. It might not mean that. It might mean that he would have children that would live, to his old age. It might not mean that. But ultimately, what do I need right now? What is my response right now in this situation, given the circumstances that I already am in? Moshe is already the leader. What's it going to help now to resent him? Nothing. So Aaron says, keep your eyes on the prize. He doesn't lose his temper. Aaron's sons are already gone. Aaron has a chance to yell and scream and blame God and be angry. But Aaron says, I don't want to be angry. I've lost enough. I want to be able to move forward. Vayidom Aharon. So perhaps the ability of Aharon to keep his focus, his clarity, is actually a rectification of Haran. And I think to myself sometimes, which am I in my life? Is this a Haran moment where I'm losing myself in the argument, where I'm losing myself in a negotiation, where people start talking about something and you know what? I jump into a fight that has nothing to do with me. And I start taking sides. What are you doing? There's a remarkable thing that we read about last week's parasha. Korach is in a fight. On Ben Pelet, he's also on Korach's side. But everybody dies in Korach's party except for On Ben Pelet. What happened to On Ben Pelet? Our rabbis teach us, On Ben Pelet, Ishto Isilato, his wife saved him. Why? Why did his wife save him? Shena'asta lo pilaot. A miracle, a wonder happened to him. What was the wonder that happened to On Ben Pelet? That his wife used the most unbelievable wisdom. About her, our Chachamim say, the Pasuk says, Chochmot Nashim Banta Beta. The wisdom of women builds the home. So what was this great wisdom that On Ben Pelet's wife came up with? On Ben Pelet comes home from the rally, from the protest. He's fired up, he's got a sign. And he's screaming and he's angry. Come on. And his wife says, where are you going? He goes, I got to go out with the boys. We're going to go fight against Moshe. She says, are you mad? Don't you know what he's done, what he's accomplished? He's like, yeah, but I got to go. And his wife says, hold on. If Korach wins and he's in charge, who are you? You're the student. If Moshe wins and he's in charge, who are you? You're the student. You stand nothing to gain here. Why are you putting yourself in this situation? Rabotai, I need you to hear this. The Gemara says that this is called the wisdom, the house-saving wisdom of a woman. And the question is asked, how is this wisdom? Isn't this obvious? And the answer is, Rabotai, everything is obvious until the fight starts. Once the fight started, once the blood temperature is rising, ain't nothing obvious. You hear people speaking to their friends, people speaking to their parents, to their wives, using the words, despicable words. And by the way, I don't mean 4-letter curse words. I mean 4-letter words that are worse than curse words. Calling your wife or your husband a liar, that's a 4-letter word. Maybe instead of saying that, you could say, I don't think it was exactly this. You might be exaggerating. You might be embellishing. To call someone a liar, that's a 4-letter word. And you know what happens? The second you call them a liar, you've now forced them to react to you in a stronger way, and the cycle of violence begins. Says the Pasuk, what wisdom? You know why? Because it was already in the middle of the fight. And she was able to maintain composure and make a single logical calculation. Wow, that's amazing. And by the way, it is. When people are fighting, for someone to agree and say, you know what? That makes sense. That's unbelievably wise, humble, praiseworthy. So don't let it get there. Ask yourself first, before I get into any argument or any fight, what is my end goal here? What am I gaining here? Pull an on Ben Pellet. What am I gaining? Is that clear? The minute we plug into this, all of a sudden you start realizing, you know what? Moshe's already in charge. What is it going to do now? When I want to get him fired? Hashem chose him. Let's move on. I want to share with you something unbelievable. This idea. Ohev Shalom, says the Mishnah, Virodef Shalom. Now, it's interesting. It doesn't say Ohev Shalom, Rodef Shalom. It says Ohev Shalom, Virodef Shalom. You love peace, and therefore you chase peace, even when it's running away. Even when the other person is not being a partner for peace. Sorry to use that word. Okay? Even when they're not doing their bit. Still, you're chasing after them, even though they're running away. Yeah, but shouldn't they? Yes, they should. But they didn't. And now we are here. So what is the end goal? What is the prize? How do I keep my eyes on it? They ran away. Do I want peace or do I want honor? What do I want here? Okay? Listen to this. Amazing. So when you love something, you run after it. In fact, in the Hebrew language, we learn this great truth. The word for run in Hebrew is ratz, which means to run. The root of the word rotzeh, which means something that you want, is ratz. So in that same word, what you want, what you desire actually becomes something that you chase after. So if you love money, if you want money, what will you do? You will run after it. You'll pursue it. If you love honor, you're going to pursue honor. I'm not saying you're going to get it. Chances are you probably won't. Like the Mishnah says, someone who chases after honor, honor runs away from him. Okay? But you will proceed to run after it. Says the Mishnah, Aaron loved peace. And we learn that not from Kohen, but from Aaron before. Once we see he was a lover of peace, we know that he's going to be a person who's going to chase after peace. So what does this mean, to chase after peace? And I want to talk about this from a few different perspectives. One of the big challenges in chasing after peace is that every single person who ever chased peace feels miserable. You feel horrible. Because you think to yourself, what am I, a doormat? I asked the guy to come to the table. I went to the person I asked for mechila. What am I have to keep chasing? They don't want? Forget about him. That's it. Cut him out of my life. Yeah? That's what most people say. I want to share with you unbelievable. There was a man whose name was Rav Zelig Braverman. Big tzaddik. Tremendous Talmid Chacham. Elderly man. He had a chavruta. He had a study partner. Every week, he would learn and study together with a man who had unfortunately recently lost his sight. He was now going blind. The rabbi cared for him. He felt for him. So he would study with him, and the guy couldn't read, and the rabbi would read to him. Obviously a very kind and generous and righteous person. He would sit and learn with him. And one day he sees this blind man, who's now blind, unfortunately, was very perturbed, very upset. And he says, what's the matter? What's bothering you? By the way, we learned this idea already from Yosef HaSadiq, that it is a mitzvah when you see someone who's down or upset to ask them, what's the matter? Sounds obvious. But we learn it from Yosef, where he was in the prison, and he says to the guy, Lama naflu panecha? How come your face has fallen? This care, this concern, this compassion, this empathy, we learn of it in the Torah already. So he felt for him. He says, what's the matter? And the man says, Rabbi, it's very hard for me to focus on our studying, on our learning today. He says, because I'm fighting with my wife. And the rabbi says, what are you fighting with your wife over? He says, Rabbi, as time's gone on and my sight has got worse and worse, so it's getting more and more difficult for me to help around the house. And the last few days, I told my wife, I'm really sorry. It's very difficult for me to see. I can't help. And my wife is so upset about it. She's so angry. She's so mad that I'm unable to help around the house, that it's causing a lot of friction. She's yelling and screaming, what do you think I am? I'm your slave, da 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 da. And he says, and I don't know what to do. The rabbi says, look, I think if you give it time, things will get better. And he says, and of course, I'll also have you in mind and I'll pray for you. The man says to the rabbi, thank you so much. It's so kind of you that you're going to pray for me. And Rav Braverman does pray for him. And a few days later, the man comes back and he says, things are much better. She's been so nice to me. She's being so kind. She's, the difference is miraculous, Rabbi. Miraculous. My friends, what the blind man did not know is that in the morning, Rav Zelig Braverman had gone round his house and waited till when his wife was going shopping in Machane Yehuda. And every day, when she would leave the house to go to Machane Yehuda, the rabbi would come in the house and he would sweep the floors, and he would clean up the kitchen, and he would wipe the toilet bowl. The woman came home, she saw the house is fixed up, she figured, oh my gosh, my husband must actually be getting his act together. He's realizing how difficult it is for me, and look, he cleaned up when I went out. She didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to say anything. She thought he was trying to be nice, and this was his way of saying sorry. So she smiles at him. Of course, he can't see it. You don't know why. She says, that's so nice. So nice. I can't believe how good what a great husband you are. He don't even know what she's talking about. He can't see that the room is clean. So he goes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, your prayers have been answered. Miraculous. That's what it means, Rodef Shalom. Rodef Shalom means you could be the rabbi and you could be cleaning a toilet bowl and sweeping and mopping the floor of a person who you don't know so well even. Just for the sake of being able to bring shalom back. If shalom is important in general, how much more so is shalom important in the most, in the closest relationship that exists on earth between a husband and wife? So much so that our Torah tells us that in the process of eliminating the suspicion between a man who doubts his wife whether she is being faithful or not, the Torah says you erase the letters of God's name into the drink of the sotah to prove to her husband that she is indeed faithful. God says, let my name be erased. What's the worst sin in the world? The worst sin in the world we know is Chilul Hashem. Destroying, literally, profaning the name of God. God says, take that sin, erase it for the sake of shalom between husband and wife. Sometimes a rabbi needs to actually tread very carefully about this issue, because there are people who are inspired and becoming more religious, and it's causing problems in their shalom bayit between them and their wife. And then they have a question internally, or a parent has a question internally. Their son or their daughter is getting a little bit more connected, a little bit more religious, but look, their house is falling apart. You don't want to tell the guy not to come pray, and yet we see the worst sin, Chilul Hashem. The worst. Hashem says, forget Chilul. Erase my whole name for the sake of keeping a family together. There was a woman who was going to a shi'ur. She went to the shi'ur of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara relates. And the husband is very upset. His wife gets home late. He says, what is this? Where have you been all this time? I've been looking for you. I needed this. I needed that. She says, I was at the shi'ur of Rabbi Meir. He didn't believe her. He says, that's why you were out by Rabbi Meir studying? You weren't here? He says, I'm not letting you in the house until you spit in Rabbi Meir's face. The woman's nowhere to go. She's crying. She goes back. Rabbi Meir says, what happened? She tells him the story. He says, oh my gosh, unbelievable. He says, please, I need your help. And look at how kind Hashem is. She says, what are you talking about? He says, I have actually a very bad ailment in my eye that makes it that I can't see. And the only way actually, I can see with these dry eyes, he says, is if someone spits in my eye 7 times. So would you please do me this, this favor, because without it, I won't even be able to see. And the woman can't believe it. She spits in his eye, and then when she finishes, Rabbi Meir sits up and he says, go back to your husband and tell him, not only did you spit in Rabbi Meir's face once, you spit in his face 7 times. Rabbi Meir was the greatest of the Tanaim. But nothing mattered. No honor, no ego when it came to shalom, when it came to peace. So what are we holding on to? What have we lost sight of if we can hold on to any sort of machloket, any sort of fight, and leave shalom behind? You know, that's what it means to run after peace. To run after it. To not let it get away from you. To not let it get to a stage where you can't catch it. And I must say, if you didn't get the first level of Aharon, where you didn't let it penetrate you, and I always say this, what does it mean not to let anger penetrate? How does that work? They hurt my feelings. Listen to this. The Avot Rabbi Natan shares an unbelievable story. It tells us about Aharon HaKohen. And listen what he says. V'chen shnei bnei Adam. How did Aharon bring peace between friends and spouses? He would see 2 people that were fighting. Halach Aharon v'yashav etzel achad mehem. Aharon would go sit down with one of them. Amar lo, he'd say, Beni re'eh chaverecha mahu omer. I don't know if you know what your friend is saying. I just saw him wherever, mitaref et libo. He's tearing his heart apart. V'koreya et bigadav. And he's literally ripping his clothes as if he's in mourning. Oh man, you know what your friend, your husband, your wife is saying? Oy li, woe is to me. He'ach esa et enai. How could I even lift my eyes off the ground? Ve'er'eh et chaverai. I'm going to see my husband, I'm going to see my wife after what I did. Boshti emenu. I'm humiliated. She'ani hu shesarakti alav. I made the mistake against him. Right? I just wish that I would be able to go to him and ask forgiveness, but I'm too embarrassed. I wish he would come to me first. Yoshet etzlo, he would sit with him until he took the jealousy out of his heart. Aaron would then go to the other. And Aaron would say the same thing. I just met your friend. I just met your wife. She's crying in the supermarket. I asked her what's the matter. She's telling me how devastated she is. She's heartbroken. She's torn her clothing. How could I have made this mistake? I wish I had the courage to be able to go say I'm sorry, to admit it. I was the one that made the mistake. Yoshev Etzlo would sit with him. He would take the jealousy out of their heart. Next day, they're walking down the street, they see each other. They would embrace and kiss one another. Because of this it says, this is why everyone cried for Aharon. So I want to share 2 points. Point number 1. Aharon says, Mes'ir kin'ah milibo. What? Kin'ah? Who's talking about jealousy? We're talking about 2 people that are fighting. He would give them the whole song and dance about how the other guy is really sorry, how the other guy says it's his fault, and then he would sit with him until he took the jealousy out of his heart. What jealousy? He took the what out of his heart? The Avot Rabbi Natan is teaching us something unbelievable. That most of the time, when you're fighting with someone, it's because you're jealous of them. And conversely, what that means is that most of the time, when someone's fighting with you, it's because they are jealous of you. Boom! That means that a husband who's fighting with his wife, right? What are they fighting over? This one says this one says that. The husband is jealous of his wife. He feels that she has something, or a friend is jealous of they have something I don't have. You have 2 partners. One person in the business making a lot of money. The other partner is not making so much money. And they're yelling and screaming at each other. The guy who's making more money is jealous of the other guy because the other guy has more friends He's more well-liked in the company. The guy who has more friends in the company is jealous of the guy who's making more money. So they're arguing now over some sort of power, but each one of them is jealous of one another. So what Aharon HaKohen was able to do was he was able to say to each person, that person is heartbroken. Aharon wasn't lying. When we love people and we are fighting with them, are our hearts not broken? Don't we wish that we could go back to the way things were? We do. We are heartbroken. We are tearing our clothes. We are wishing we could take back what we said. So what's the problem? Why don't we? Because we're embarrassed. We're embarrassed to go. It's humiliating to go and say it was me. I made the mistake. What Aharon did was, through talking each one of them through the other's position, telling them that that person actually is sorry. My wife, no, she's my husband, my kids, my parents, they hate me. They don't hate you. Something came up. Something came up in their heart. They were jealous. They were upset that, you know what, they feel that you should call more often. They feel that you should give more, pitch in more in the house. They feel that you should, show up to work more. They feel that you shouldn't contradict them in the boardroom. They feel that you're someone who's undermining them. That person feels he's upset about it. So he said something because he was upset. He doesn't mean the thing that he said. He means his hurt. That's what he means. What he's really saying, when people fight, what are they really saying? They're saying, I am hurting. Can you hear that? That's what Aaron said to each of them. Gafafo, when they wound up seeing each other, they would fall into each other's arms. They remembered how much they loved one another. And they remembered as well that what it was that upset them actually is not as important as they thought that it was. And by the fact that the other person already had said sorry, that's enough. How many fights could be solved if both sides weren't saying, in more sophisticated words or less sophisticated words, I'm not saying sorry first. Get over yourself. What do you really want here? What's really the prize? I want to share with you an unbelievable story about Ohev Shalom Verodef Shalom and how far this goes. There was a rabbi whose name was the Divrei Yecheskel. And he was asked to come to a certain town. He came to the town. And his job in this town, the reason why he came and he joined, was because he'd been asked to officiate at a wedding. Rabbi gets to the town. He knows that they're setting up the hall. They don't need him, they don't need him yet. So what does he decide? He's going to go study in the local shul. He goes to study in the shul. And he notices that there's a kid who's going back, forth, this, that. He's making noise in the shul. The gabai, the person who's running the shul, sees this kid. He says, you got to be quiet. You got to be this. You got to be that. The kid, he's a little kid. He's running around, making noise. He drops a book. He knocks something over. Eventually, this gabai had enough. He starts yelling at the kid. Chutzpah, gives him a slap across the face. Divrei Yecheskel is called away from the scene. He goes to the wedding hall. He sits down with the Chatan and Kala. He says, Mazal Tov, Mabruk, I'm ready to do the wedding. He says, but before we begin the wedding, I need to know, who are the people you're honoring? Who are you giving the berachot to? Who are you doing? If I'm going to arrange the wedding, I need to know who you're calling up, who's going to be the witnesses. So there used to be a custom, by the way, and actually it's quite a smart custom, that you could give out however many berachot you want under the chuppah. But the witnesses of the kiddushin, of the marriage, and the witnesses signing on the ketubah, those you didn't have the right to give out. And in every city, there were specific people that they would give to all the time. Why? Because the berachot anyone could get. But the witnesses have to be kosher. And if the witnesses are not kosher, then what they are witnessing doesn't actually have a legally binding count. So The two witnesses are actually what make the wedding a wedding. Very important to know that. You can have 500 people at a wedding. If you don't have two kosher witnesses, you didn't get married. You have to be Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut, Shomer Tarat HaMishpacha. They need to be upstanding, completely, in order to be, because it's a religious ceremony. So the religious part of the religious ceremony needs to be observed by people who are religious. Very important to know that. So the minhag used to be that they would have set edim. So that way you didn't get into any of these problems. Anyway, they say to the rabbi, don't worry about it. We have two witnesses, the two witnesses in the city, excellent, very religious people. One person is this rabbi, and the other person is the shamosh. The gabbai, the guy who's taking care of the shul. Rabbi says, I'm really sorry, but if I'm arranging the wedding, the gabbai cannot be a witness on the ketubah. I mean, he can't be a witness on the ketubah. We use him for all the weddings. He says, look, you could get someone else, but if you want me to do it, he can't. We have to find another witness. The shamosh hears the hubbub, he comes over, he asks what's going on. They said, the rabbi said you can't be the witness. He says, why not? He's wrangling his brain. He doesn't know until eventually he says, maybe the rabbi, were you in the synagogue just now? Did you just see what happened? Is that why? Otherwise, the rabbi doesn't know him at all. The rabbi says, yeah, he shakes his head. He says, you slapped a young boy across the face, not your child. So he says, okay, so I'll ask him mechila. I'll go ask forgiveness from this boy. The rabbi says, he's a katan. He's a youngster. He doesn't have the ability to be mochel. When he becomes bar mitzvah, then you can ask him for forgiveness, and then you can be a witness again. I need you to hear that. Now, I don't think it was only because he slapped him. What would have been if he would have yelled at him? That would have been enough too. You have to ask for mechila for embarrassing someone. I was once in London giving a class, and in the middle of the class, all of a sudden, a woman has a baby. It's on Yom Kippur. She's got a baby. The baby starts crying. Everyone in the room, maybe 6 people, take the baby out. What are you doing with the baby? She said, shush the baby. I said, sorry, everybody. Calm down. This is my class. Let the baby, sit down, lady, with the baby, sit with the baby, perfectly fine. They all listen, the baby's crying. I said, it is my job, this was my job in London, to engage and to bring young people to shul. We finally have a young person in shul. You're chucking them out because they're making a little noise? That noise is beautiful. You know what that noise means? It means that he's in shul. But even something that small, to humiliate, to embarrass a woman. People all the time, they think it's the biggest mitzvah in the world to correct the guy who's reading the Sefer Torah. Calm down with your mitzvot for a second. Okay? If you correct the guy and you yell at him and he gets embarrassed, the mitzvah of reading Sefer Torah in the Bet HaKnesset is never deoraita except for one, possibly 2 times in the whole year. Shabbat Zachor, according to some opinions, there's one other one, okay? It's never midoraita, it's never biblical. Humiliating a person in front of an entire synagogue is en lo chelek le'olam haba. You lose your portion in the world to come. All your mitzvot out the window. So before you think of insisting on a shvana or a shvanach or a koda, kada, think for a second. Is this worth throwing everything I've done away? That is the power of what happens when someone is embarrassed. This is how our Torah teaches. I saw something magnificent. If you're in Israel and you find there are streets that tell you something that the street itself shares a powerful lesson. One example is Derech Shechem. Where does Derech Shechem go? Derech means the road. Shechem means to Shechem. So where do you think that road leads? Probably Derech Shechem means the road to Shechem. Our rabbis say, take a look at the pasuk. We say, Etz Chaim hi lemachazikim ba, derachea darchei noam. Its ways are the ways of pleasantness. V'chol netivotea, and all of its streets, shalom. All the streets of the Torah, all the roads, they're called shalom. The road itself, darche noam, the ways of pleasantness. If the Torah is making you an angry, bitter, presumptuous, pandering person that yells at people all the time, that screams at them, that makes them feel small, what you're studying is not the Torah. It's some other testament, some New Testament, pardon my expression. But the Torah, it is surely not. Because the Torah's ways are darche noam, the ways of pleasantness. I want to share with you what this pleasantness looks like, even amongst the greatest of our people. The Chazon Ish, when he was a young man, he didn't want anyone to know who he was. So he would sit and study by himself. Nobody would do anything, just quietly by himself. Only later did people figure out who he was, and then he became the Gadol Ador. So he was considered by the people of the city to be this introvert that nobody knew. He sticks to himself, he does nothing. They didn't know who he was. Anyway, there's one person in town who knew who the Chazon Ish was. Who was that? It was the Nezer Kodesh. He lived in the city of Canaan together with the Chazon Ish. He was the great rabbi, the chief rabbi of the whole city. Everyone looked up to him, everyone respected him. When this young man came to the city, what did he do? He went right in the beginning and he started having a conversation with the Nezer Kodesh. And all of a sudden, Nezer Kodesh realizes this young, newly married guy is an absolute, bona fide genius, Talmid Chacham like he's never met. And he says to him on the spot, this grand chief rabbi says, will you study Torah with me every day? Will you be my study partner? The Chazon Ish says, okay, on one condition, no one can know what we're doing. Magnificent. So what happens every day? The Chazon Ish walks through the streets, he goes to the rabbi, knocks on his door, goes in, everybody sees the guy is going in, he sits with the rabbi, every day he sits with the rabbi for hours, and they're thinking to themselves, look, the rabbi's patience must be unbelievable. He's dealing with this introverted weirdo all the time, he must have all sorts of problems the rabbi's tending to. And so the charade continued, year on year. One day, the Chazon Ish walks in, and he says, I need to ask you a favor. He says to the Nezer Kodesh. And Nezer Kodesh says, of course, whatever you want. I love our learning together. You're someone who's so special to me. He says, we need to go visit Yankel the blacksmith. Now, the chief rabbi of a city doesn't go around randomly to people's houses. It's not the kavod. If people want to speak to him, they come to him. So he says, look, it's very important to maintain this structure, the kavod of the position, so that I don't randomly go visit people. The Chazon Ish says, let me tell you the story, and then you'll tell me if you want to go. What's the story? He says, I happened to be by the blacksmith, and I saw that the wife of the blacksmith, she was treating her husband with zero respect. She was calling him a nobody, telling him he was wasting his life, telling him all these things about how he was a good for nothing, that everybody in the city steps on him, etc., etc. And he says, and I saw that Yankel, the blacksmith, he's so embarrassed, and I could just see he was putting his head down. He didn't even have the uwe to argue with his wife. He's just taking this abuse from his wife. So the rabbi says, so what's your plan? He says, so my plan is, together with you, we'll go down together to this guy's house. Nobody knows who I am, but if the chief rabbi goes and pays a visit to go listen to Yankel the blacksmith and talk to him and ask him how he's doing and see how the business is going and etc., etc., then his wife will look at him, and his wife will look at him with a newfound respect. And I thought that it was worth telling the rabbi this, because Shalom Bayit is so important to God. Shalom in the family and the home is so important to him. He'll even erase his name. So clearly, it's something that even your name and your position, your honor, it's within the confines of what you should do. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. The rabbi puts on his fancy clothes, his hat, his this. Together they walk down. And all of a sudden the wife is looking. She's looking out the window. They see they're walking. They turn into the house. The G's wife, his mouth is hanging open. Her eyes are bugging out. She walks to the door. The chief rabbi knocks on the door. She says, yes, of course. Welcome. What are you here for? And they say, we're here to be with you, to visit with your husband, such a wonderful member of the community. You know, she's thinking to herself, the chief rabbi doesn't go visit anybody. Must be that I underestimated my husband. Must be that he's actually a much bigger and better person than I thought that he was. So, instantaneously, just with that little visit, that knock on the door, they changed the reality in the home. And I was thinking, my friends, that you don't have to be the chief rabbi of anywhere to be able to do this with people. To compliment people to their spouses. What a beautiful mitzvah. To go to a parent and say, wow, do you know what your son is doing, what your daughter's doing? You know how good they are at their job? I saw them the other day with their kids in the park, how the kids respect them. You must have raised them so well. You don't understand the power of giving or paying a compliment to somebody about people that they are close with. It can change the entire dynamic and save their world. And if you're feeling that your ego doesn't let you do that because I'm a big person, I'm a CEO, I'm going to waste my time with this person, are you more important than God himself? Is your name more valuable than his? Beautiful. This is the sensitivity that it takes. Aharon, we continue in the Mishnah, and we'll end with this. He tried to raise people up. Not just stopping them from fighting. But you know how you do that? You actually care about the person. He loved the creation. He loved everybody. And Torah, and just as we said before, the U tells you that the two are connected. You love peace, so you run after it. He loved the people. So what did he do? Torah. He raised their possibilities. He raised their Torah level. He communicated that to them, a better way to live their life. Our rabbis tell us that Aharon did this in the most magnificent of ways. Moshe was the lawgiver. He had to correct people. He had to tell them the right way to do things. Aharon never said anything to anybody. All he did was, Shalom, hey, how you doing? You're the best, Mafi Mitlak, give the guy a big hug, you're my best friend. He made everyone feel like they're his best friend. And listen to the words of Abbot Rabbi Natan. Lemachar, the next day, he would meet a Rasha and he would give him Shalom like he was the biggest Sadiq. Lemachar, the next day, Bikesh oto ha'ish la'avor avera. That guy would want to do a sin. Omer, he would say to himself, Oili. How can I meet Aharon's gaze? My good friend Aharon HaKohen. I'm embarrassed to do this sin. How can it be that me, I'm a friend of Aharon, that I should do this? Nathan Shalom, he comes to me to give me Shalom. Look, that elevation, that person would hold himself back from sin. Some people change people. Through what? Through beating them up. Through chastising, through yelling at them. And some people do exactly the opposite. They raise the person up so that eventually that person is no longer underneath the weight of their actions, of their sin. It's an amazing idea. When it says about a person, it says, when you look at a person, you should give rebuke to everybody. You have to give rebuke, you have to teach people the right way to do things. But the pasuk ends and says, and don't raise the sin above the person. Rather, the person is above the sin. What's more important than what he did is who he is. And Aaron was able to raise who he was to a point where the sin actually was smaller than the person. The person said, I can overcome this. When we chase shalom this way, we eventually reach it. And we bring shalom between families, between couples, between communities, and through that process we are zocheh to eventually reach the fabled, so to speak, day that we each wait for, with the coming of Mashiach b'mehera v'yamenu. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'imru, amen. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Wonderful to have you with us. May God bless you and yours. Amunai Varech et Amo B'Shalom.